Goodness.
So my app.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is the agenda and workshop for the Swanee River Water Management District Governing Board, and we are available on YouTube at https www.youtube.com at srwmd. It is September 23rd, 2024 at 3 o'clock. Today is a workshop day and also our final hearing on the year 2024-2025 millage rate. That will be at 5:05 time certain. So we're going to get started on our workshop agenda, and then we'll pause and have the final budget hearing. At this time, we'll do a roll call
Chair Johns,
here.
Mr. Keith,
Here.
Mr. Swab,
Here.
Mr. Smith,
Here.
Mr. Sessions,
Here.
Mr. Thompson, Mr. Lloyd,
Here.
Mr. Wheeler.
Here.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Robin. And since our nation is in need of a good prayer, let's go ahead and rise for an invocation and a pledge.
Father God, we thank you for this day, Lord. We thank you for your many blessings. Father, I lift a special prayer up to you today for the leadership of this country. I pray that you'll put a burden on their hearts for calm and peace. Father, that we can find unity in this country again and be the great nation that we were born to be. Father, I ask your blessing on this meeting, that you will lead us and guide us and give us strength. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. So our first workshop then is the University of Florida Snook Thermal Refuge Study presentation. Hi, good morning, afternoon.
Good
It's
afternoon.
hard to get off the morning thing.
I know it is. Good afternoon. My name's Mike Allen. I'm with the University of Florida IFAS, and I'm excited to present the results of this study with you guys today. I appreciate the chance to be here. As you recall, our goal in this study was to look at the potential for the springs, particularly Fanning and Manatee Springs, but some of the other ones as well, to provide thermal refuge for snook. And I want to point out my co-authors here, both with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, which we've done this in partnership with them all the way along, as well as at UF. So I'll get started. This is part of a larger collaboration. We also have work going on with the Southwest Florida Water Management District in Crystal River, looking at snook habitat use in Crystal River. That district has used snook habitat requirements during winter for an MFL already, and they have plans to do more. So this is part of a larger effort, but focused on the Swanee in this case. So this is the common snook, one of the iconic game fish species in Florida. Lots of people come here to catch them. I don't blame them. I chase them myself. They're a fantastic sport fish, delicious to eat, but also very well managed. You know, it's interesting. We consider them an estuarine fish, and they definitely require the estuary for reproduction. But when you talk to the biologists that have worked with snook for a long time in the FWC, they really consider them more of a river fish because they spend a lot of their time in the rivers around the state. They need the coast and the estuarine condition to spawn, but they spend a lot of time in freshwater. And as Harry and I were talking before, we hear reports of snook. I've heard them, a confirmed snook catch by an angler as far north as in the Withlacoochee River in Georgia. So they go way up the Swanee River. Most of our fish don't, but they definitely use a good bit of the Swanee River. Historically, they only were about as far up north as Tarpon Springs in the green there, but starting about 2012, they started expanding to the northward, and they're doing that both in our coast and over on the East Coast, and they're also doing the same thing in Texas. So like a lot of species, tropicalization, as we're having warmer winters, less cold events, these species are moving northward, and snook is no exception. On the left-hand side of the graph there is the number. This is actually a really good data set. This is all the snook collected from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's Fisheries Independent Monitoring. They sample 12 days a month in Cedar Key all year long. So this is an amalgamation of all those data. And you can see that before about 2008, there were basically no snook. And if you talk to people in Cedar Key and that area, snook were extremely rare species and never collected in the Fisheries Independent Monitoring Program prior to that. But around 2014, 2015, they really started getting in big numbers, peaking around 2020, and then there was a dip, and we haven't gotten the full data yet for 2024, but there's still a lot of snook in the area. On the right-hand side, you can see an expansion of like where we collected, and we started collecting fish around Cedar Key in 2000 to 2009, and then started seeing this expansion throughout the whole region to where they're common up in the Swanee River and further north than that. Many more reports in Steinhatchee and those kinds of things as well. So this population now is what we consider fully established. They're viable, reproducing every year. We have juveniles every year. They're a fully established fish population now. We started being interested in what these snook did during winter because we knew that the water temperatures in Cedar Key and the Swanee Sound in most winters get too cold for snook, at least at some point. Not every winter, but most winters the water gets too cold, which if it gets below about 10 degrees C, which is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, if it gets below that, it causes mortality in snook. And when we get extended cold fronts, we can definitely see mortality events. And we have seen mortality events. We've seen reports of dead snook just about every year. You'll see reports of some. And some anglers get concerned because they'll say there's hundreds of fish. But regarding how many fish are there, so far we haven't had a major kill. So we started putting acoustic tags in the fish. That middle picture is a surgery where we're implanting a tag in the abdomen of a fish, and then when the fish swim around, we have these receivers that we can actually track their movements. That the receiver picks up the initial tag and the tag number, so we know which fish went where, and we have receivers spread around now. So we started that in 2016, 2017. Let me see if this is going to work. Yeah. So I don't want you to dig into this much except to look at the yellow is the fish in the Swanee mouth. And what you can see is that those fish are in the Swanee mouth area, the lower part of the river in the wintertime and in the summer. And these are fish that we tagged in Cedar Key. So we tagged these fish in Cedar Key. And I honestly thought when we started this that these fish would have gone south into Crystal River to get to warmer water, move south like mackerel and sharks and everything else do. But we started hearing reports from anglers, and we started detecting them on an array that USGS has, a receiver array for Gulf sturgeon in the Swanee. So all of a sudden we started hearing these fish, and USGS is saying, what are these fish? And they sent to us, and we're like, those are our snook. And they were, so about 80% of our snook in Cedar that we've tagged in Cedar Key go to the lower Swanee in the wintertime. And so they're using the river itself for thermal refuge. So we expanded our coverage of the river 6 or so years ago. We're using the array that the USGS has for Gulf of Mexico sturgeon, which can hear our snook as well as adding additional receivers, as you'll see in this talk. We also put some temperature tags in fish that would actually, when it records the location of a fish, it would record the temperature, the water temperature where that fish is. So some of the fish we do actually get temperature data from them. And so we've expanded into the river. The river mouth itself of the Swanee, especially East Pass, but West Pass as well, tends to be warmer than the coastal estuary. In most cases, at least. There's some cases it's not, but in generally, the river itself is somewhat of a thermal refuge for the fish for over much of the winter. And we find large numbers of our tagged fish from Cedar Key use the East Pass area and West Pass as well, but especially East Pass. So we knew that these fish were going to and from the river every winter and coming back out to the coast in the summer. But we also knew that the springs were creating some thermal refuge and that snook were using those springs similar to manatees do. And of course, the springs have fairly constant temperature, at least at the discharge, and provide a thermal refuge because the springs are around 73 degrees, 72, 73 degrees, depending on the discharge rates. So it's a warm water spot for them. And in this study, we really wanted to focus on Fanning and Manatee Springs. So I'll show you some of that. So the objectives of this study that was funded by the district was to do a better job of actually trying to quantify the thermal refuge habitat around these springs. How much of a plume is there of warm water that's leaving the springs? How does that change with river discharge and with river temperature? And what are some of the dynamics there? So we're hoping that that objective will end up being informative for minimum flows and levels. Because if springs discharge more, there's going to be more thermal refuge, more warm water, right? And we also wanted to look at the fine scale movements and habitat use of the snook around those springs so we could understand more how they're using the areas. And then we also wanted to go look at some of the other springs in the lower Suwannee River for occurrence of snook as potential alternate thermal refuge sites. So that was our goal here. So I'm going to talk first about the objective one, the thermal refuge habitat. And we use this Castaway CTD sampler. And this is it's basically a device that you can put out and it records temperature instantaneously with a GPS signal with it. So a waypoint with it. So basically you can deploy this and it will give you instantaneously the temperature as you drop it through the water column. You can measure the temperature as it goes down and it measures the temperature and the location. And so we set up stations around Fanning and Manatee Springs, those kind of orange yellow dots, to try to quantify how does the spring plume change. Now we figured here that the spring would remain warm most of the time. We focused our areas in the river to see how much thermal refuge habitat, because we knew from our past studies that a lot of fish were using the river just downstream of the springs for thermal refuge in the winter. So we did some pilot data collection in the first year and then intensive data collection in this past year, winter 2023, 2024. And Ashley McDonald did this, and she set up a statistical random forest model to try to predict the amount of thermal refuge habitat based on things like depth, river discharge, air temperature, distance from the spring, et cetera, so that we could better understand that. For objective 2, and this is to understand the fish movements, we purchased with this project a different type of receiver from Vimco, the company that makes this technology. And what this does is we set up an array of receivers right around each of these springs that basically the idea was to allow us to track the fish movements in 3D form. So we could track them wherever. And the idea is that if the fish are heard on 3 different receivers at the same time, it can triangulate the distance from the signal and figure out exactly where that fish was in regard to the thermal plume from each of these springs. So the FWC set up this array with us. They did the actual getting in the water with scuba and putting these receivers on the bottom and doing the testing of it. So a lot of work went into that. But you can see the arrays here for both Fanning and Manatee Springs. And again, we're focused on the river habitat that we expect could be affected by the spring itself and create thermal refuge. So the idea is that if a snook is anywhere in that quadrat, we'd be able to hear exactly where they are all the time. And this has turned out to be really interesting. We've learned a lot in this study, as I'll go through now. We also tagged additional fish, 26 snook tagged at the river mouth, and that's with surgery to implant the tag. Those tags last for 7 years, so once we tag a fish, we get data on them for a long time if they don't die or get caught. We have an external tag in, so if it does get caught, we can get a report of that. But we tagged additional fish here, but we didn't actually tag as many around the springs as we were expecting to, because what we ran into when it gets cold, there's so many snook using the springs and that thermal refuge that we get a tag collision where a receiver is sitting there and it's trying to record an individual tag, but there's 3 more tag signals coming to it, and it can't get the exact location of the fish because it's getting bombarded with too many tags. So once we figured that out, that was going on, we didn't tag more fish because we figured we had plenty in there and we didn't want to make the problem worse. So we focused our tagging efforts downstream to alleviate that. But I think we've got that kind of figured out, and it worked out. So, okay, so I'm going to move into the results, and this is for Manatee Springs, and I'm going to focus on this past winter, which was the more interesting of the 2 winters that we had in this study, and also the one that we were able to do a lot better job of quantifying the thermal refuge habitat. So the little red dot you see up in and orange and yellow dot you see in the upper right hand of each one of those panels is the spring effluent from Manatee Springs. That's right where the springs open into the river. And you can see that okay, I just saw it. Okay, so the CTD temperature is the degrees above the ambient river temperature. So if it's red, it's like 5.8 degrees warmer than the river itself, okay? And if it's minus 0.78 on that lower left, that's like a little bit cooler than the average river temperature is what that is. So it's all normalized to the river temperature. But what you see is like on December 7th, okay, December 7th, where that red is there, I can point that out. On December 7th, right here, we had a river height and a river discharge rate that was kind of moderate, and you can see the spring itself was very warm. But when the discharge went up, and this is one of the main things we learned, is when the discharge was really high up here, those high discharge years, like it was this year in January, you see much less red in the river. So the river water is swamping out the thermal refuge, and there's less thermal refuge for snook because the river water is high and the river was cold. And I'll show you that in a different graph. So, and you can tell that when the spring dumps in any of these, there's kind of a plume of relatively warm water that runs down this shoreline, and that's in all of them. But the degree to which it provides thermal refuge, of course, varies with the discharge of the Suwannee River. So the Suwannee River discharge matters with regard to how much thermal refuge there's going to be for snook in this case. This one is Manatee Springs, and the spring vent for Manatee Springs is up here, and this little other warm spot you see down here is, I'm sorry, Fanning Springs. This is Fanning Springs, and the one down here is Little Manatee Springs. So we had, we measured temperature around both of those. Little Manatee is a lot smaller, but just downstream. And this graph demonstrates how it's kind of hard to drive, how the air temperature drives the thermal refuge as well. So when it's really cold out, that means the river's dropping in temperature and you get less thermal refuge as well. Like, for example, up in this case, the upper right, we've got a warm spot right at the mouth of the river here, November 30th, and not much, pretty much downstream of Fanning Springs is pretty close to the ambient river temperature. So unlike what we saw in Manatee Springs, in Fanning Springs, there's not a big thermal refuge area downstream of there. Fanning Springs has a much lower discharge, and the river configuration is a bit different there as well compared to Manatee Springs. So this is the random forest linear model that Ashley put together, and so it's saying what explains the amount of thermal refuge habitat in the river, and that how much area of warm water there would be. And river temperature was the major effect. This is the strongest. So if you took river temperature out, it had a big effect on the model. So the river temperature had a big effect, and river discharge. So the point is that what's happening in the Suwannee River matters a lot to what happens in the amount of thermal refuge habitat. Also important were the 3-day air temperature coefficient of variation. So if there was a big drop in temperature, that would have an effect. The spring discharge was also important. So how much the spring's discharging, as well as depth, and then distance from the mouth, et cetera. So you can think about the amount of thermal refuge from the springs being a pretty complex amalgamation of river discharge, river temperature, spring discharge, and all those things are going to combine to look at how much thermal refuge there would be in this instance. Fanning was similar for Fanning Springs. Again, river discharge was an important one. 3-day air max temperature was an important one. So when it's cold, the river's colder and there's less thermal refuge. 3-day air min temperature, and et cetera. So again, it's multiple factors are affecting that amount of thermal plume area in this analysis. So river discharge and the river temperature strongly influence that amount of thermal refuge that you're going to see in here. But the spring discharge was also important in both models. And of course, air temperature is a big driver of river temperature, which is going to influence these things as well. And to summarize all of that, what that means is that the worst case scenario for killing snook in the lower Swanee is going to be a situation where the river's really cold and the river's really high, because that's going to be a very restricted amount of habitat for those fish in that case, and it basically swamps the effect of the springs. So now let's compare that to what the snook actually did in those habitats and see how those overlay. This demonstrates that and this is from 2021, but just demonstrates that the temperature in the spring mouth is influenced by the river discharge. And this is the effect of when the discharge is high, the temperature at the mouth of the springs goes down too. So it's saying that these things are related. Okay, so let me work through these. On the left-hand side is Fanning Springs, and this is a graph from all of our, the whole study from December 22 to March of this year, 2024. And on the y-axis is the number of tagged snook that we identified on a receiver as individually being there. So it was you could think about the number of individual snook. Now keep in mind, so the most in the Fanning Springs was we documented 10 snook in the Fanning Springs effluent and these are fish that we had tagged. I want to keep in mind, I want you to be sure to understand that if we detected 10 of our tagged snook, we have less than 0.01% of the snook in the Swanee River tagged. So if we're getting 10 tagged snook, that means there's a lot of snook there, right? It's like there's a lot of fish there because we have a very, very low proportion of the fish are tagged. Okay. The river temperature is in red. Oops, I hit the wrong button. The river temperature is in red, and the number of snook detections are in blue. And it rolled along, so you can see that there was a kind of a peak in detections in March, kind of a decline in Fanning, and then the winter of this past winter, 2023, 2024, we had very low detections here. Only one fish tagged or detected in March. And keep in mind that the river temperatures here were down at 10 degrees C. That's that low point right there is a lethal temperature for snook. That is not a place snook want to be. That will kill them. And at 12 C, which is just here, that will stress them out enough to maybe lose equilibrium and start drifting downstream. And the snook, it takes a lot of cold to kill a snook. But what happens is they'll lose equilibrium and they'll just drift downstream and you'll think they're dead, but it actually takes that water temperature below 10 degrees to actually cause the mortality event. So the river was cold this past year, and we were seeing very few detections at Fanning Springs, which surprised me because what I expected to see was when it was really cold, we would see tons of our fish in the river mouth, ganged up. That's not what we saw. Manatee Springs, same graph, more stable detections, but more detections actually throughout the winter of 2024. Manatee Springs has a much higher discharge and more thermal refuge, as we showed in the previous graph. Clearly more of a thermal footprint on the river that gives some warm water habitat. But also in Manatee, I was surprised that in both systems in 2024, this year, during this event, when it was super cold, that cold event, we're getting no snook detections at either one of our rays. We were not detecting any tag snook at Fanning or Manatee Springs when the water was the coldest. Okay. Well, we dug into that with the spatial movement of these fish and understanding, because we have this array set, and if the fish leaves downstream, we know it because it gets recorded on that last receiver and it never comes back in. It turns out, well, let me go to the next one first because I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I also want to talk about discharge while we're here. So this is Fanning Springs and Manatee, and this is, instead of temperature, I'm showing discharge. So this period here where the river was cold, which I showed you on the first graph, is also when the river discharge was very high, okay? Some of the highest in the whole time series in both cases for both rivers, both spring systems. And we were seeing very few detections of fish during that high discharge cold period. Again, a gap here where almost no fish are being detected. So that was super interesting because I would have predicted going into this that we would get the most detections under this scenario. Cold, really cold, high discharge, they would be sucked into the spring looking for that warm water. I'll show you a couple more graphs. This is a snook use of Manatee Springs. These are individual snook that you can see. This is where Manatee Springs comes into the river, and you can see them drift downstream, and each one of these is an individual fish with an individual location. That's the first winter. In 2023, 2024, this is when the river was high and cold. We saw less of our fish here, just in general at both springs, than we did in the previous year. Not sure where all of them went, but we know where some of them went, which I'll get to in just a second. Yeah, of course.
If you don't mind.
Yep.
Tim, you see where those fish are congregating on what side of the river? Them jokers know if they get in Dixie County over there, they're going to be eaten. I mean, that's fair game in Dixie County. You see that? All right, just want to make sure you notice that. Yes, sir.
Yeah. For the fishermen in the room, this is a very informative graph.
Yes, it is.
It's a very informative graph.
You
I had
keep
put
pulling
this on
those.
Facebook.
If you don't mind, can I have a copy of your presentation? Of
course, you're on the board. Of course, you could have a copy. So this graph is kind of changing the subject a little bit, but it's getting at what we learned with this three-dimensional tracking of the fish. And this is the daily movements of the fish in 2022, 2023, when we had a lot of fish using the river adjacent to Manatee Springs. And there's some interesting, the point of this is that habitat around the springs also matters. And what we found is that the fish, so 0, 0, of course, is midnight, and that's 1 a.m. What we found is that the fish would use the very mouth of Manatee Springs at night. They would go up here, and our concentrations in the middle of the night, the fish would be at the mouth of the springs. And then after daylight, we would start seeing fish move, and they'd move downstream to, y'all are going to want to pay attention to this. There's a beautiful tree right there that is on a drop off where the river drops about 2 meters, about 6 feet, right at the edge of that tree. And these fish would leave that spring habitat and a lot of them would go down here. And again, if we've got like 5 or 6 of our tagged snook there, there's a lot of snook right there. And then it would come back, and then later at night, there's 6 p.m., 7 p.m., and they're back. So they would do this kind of, and we saw that day after day. They would use the spring mouth in the nighttime, and in the day they would move just downstream, which also was warmer than the ambient river temperature. And they would use that other habitat, which was a drop off and a big lay down tree.
Must have been some food down there for them too.
Maybe so. They are feeding some during the winter. But I also wonder if maybe the commotion of Manatee Springs and people around during the day, I don't know. But they definitely were showing these diurnal movements. And I think what this emphasizes is the habitat use is thermal refuge is important, but it's not the only thing. And these fish were clearly selecting habitats due to some other reasons as well. Because if they just wanted to stay in the warmest habitat, they would stay at the mouth. So, okay, so back on track. This is Fanning Springs. Now, I know it looks crazy that we don't have snook walking up on the bank over at over at Swanee Bell Landing or any of that. So you're not going to find one over there at the restaurant. What that is it's a fish that the receivers detected the individual fish, but it wasn't detected on 3 receivers, so it couldn't get an exact location. So it would say something close, which showed it up on the bank. So you can't put credence in that, obviously, but it means that there was an individual snook in the array, and so you can ignore that. What it means is it was probably down in this area, but we can't get the exact location of it. During winter 2023, 2024, we had a lot of snook around the Fanning Springs mouth and some downstream. In general, just like Manatee Springs, we had more snook using the springs in the winter 2022, 2023, which wasn't as wasn't as cold, and the discharge wasn't as high, and we had less snook using both of them during 2023 and 2024 when the river was high and cold, okay? So the fish used both springs in that winter, this is what I just said, but this is interesting. So we used the array, and what we found was the fish, because I was talking to Brian with FWC. I said, this doesn't make sense. We're saying that we think the thermal refuge is important, but our detections went to near zero when the river was the coldest and the river temperature was high. Well, there were actually, when he did the spatial analysis of the fish, there were 2 different explanations. In Fanning Springs, we documented those fish actually left the array. They didn't go into Fanning Springs. They went downstream, and they didn't come back. I don't know what happened to them yet. We'll learn more as we pick them up on other receivers, hopefully, if they didn't die. But we did not find fish going into Fanning Springs and overwintering in Fanning Springs. They were not doing that. They were leaving the array, going downstream, and not coming back. In Manatee Springs, our detections went down in 2024, but that's because the fish went in the spring. We documented them. They're going into the spring run, and then we documented them coming back out of the spring run. So we know that at least a portion of the fish, we didn't have as high detections in year 2, but some of those fish we know we didn't see them on our array, but it's because they went in the spring, and when they came back, they were in the array. So we knew they used Manatee Springs to go in there during the winter. Okay, so we searched some other springs, Hart Springs, Troy, the Ichetuckney River, Sun Springs, and Madison Blue Springs, which I never did get a chance to go to, but Ashley tells me that was a tremendously difficult place to access with an outboard motor and an electrofishing boat, but she managed to do it several times. The only springs that we found snook in with the electrofishing boat was Hart Springs. We had 5 in 2023 and 2 in 2024. And we put some tags in. I don't think all those fish, but we may have tagged all of them. I can't recall that off the top of my head. But we tagged fish there, and we also we had some extra receivers, and we set up an array there. We haven't analyzed the data, but we have an array there for Hart Springs. We have the data for what happened there. But Hart Springs is another one that could have some important thermal refuge habitat in some years. So we'll have to see as we get more data from those receivers. We download those receivers about every 6 months or so. So a lot of times we don't know exactly what's happened until we get the data from them. Now, just because we didn't collect snook with electrofisher doesn't mean that there's not snook used in there. We know from angler reports that snook have been collected in many of these springs by anglers, but we haven't been able to get them with electrofishing. And electrofishing is not all that efficient, and it could be that there were snook there and we didn't collect them. So we can't say that's absolute. But we do plan to extend our monitoring of Hart Springs and use this array to do something similar to what we've done in Fanning and Manatee Springs. Okay, so to summarize what we've learned here, and this is really interesting to me how the fish use differed when the river is up and cold, and how it differed between Fanning and Manatee Springs. The amount of thermal refuge habitat for snook in the lower river is going to depend on Swanee River discharge for sure, the Swanee River water temperature, the spring flow rates, which is important for minimum flows and levels, of course. And those are all going to be important, as well as some other factors that were less important than those. And the worst case scenario is when the Swanee River discharge, for snook at least, is when the Swanee River discharge is high and the temperatures are cold. When that happens, what we've documented in this study is that, to our knowledge, Manatee Springs is the only known thermal refuge in the lower river. So this winter was cold, but it wasn't that cold. And these fish are vulnerable to a large fish kill, which I believe will happen at some point. So based on what we've learned here, it looks to us like Manatee Springs is the only really warm spot that we know of. Maybe the Ichetucknee as well. That we know that snook have used the Ichetucknee. We haven't collected them there, but we've gotten some tag pings at the mouth of the Ichetucknee near the Santa Fe River. But keep in mind that most of the snook that we've tagged in Cedar Key, they don't go that far up. Some do. But most of the snook we've tagged, like over 90% of the snook we've tagged in Cedar Key, go to the lower river, and most of them don't even go up to Fanning and Manatee. Some of them do. And the FWC biologist, Brian Clemick, he kind of thinks of it as you have kind of a river population, because he sees these fish that use the river and use the springs, and then you have an estuary population that only uses the river in the middle of winter. And there's some mixing between those two, but not that much. Manatee Springs is the largest spring in the lower basin of the Swanee, and it looks like it's definitely one of the most critical thermal refuge sites. Fish left Fanning Springs in 2024 and moved downstream. They did not go into the spring run, at least our tag fish didn't. Are basically because when the river was high and cold, it basically swamped. Fanning Springs is a fairly short spring run. It's really wide right there. And when the river comes up, it's swamp. I believe it just swamps that whole thing. And basically it eliminates that thermal refuge habitat. And they certainly our tag fish weren't using it this past year. Okay, so that's the conclusion of the study. Now we have these receiver arrays in place, and I've been talking to Sean. We've had great collaboration with the district. We've had some of their biologists out with us in the field. We have these receiver arrays in place. We've already learned with the tag collision that we don't need to tag a lot more fish. We tagged some in the estuary this year, but I don't want to get too many because we'll get the tag collision problem. So what we're hoping to do is continue the temperature modeling, because every winter is a different story. Every winter has a different combination of discharge of the Swanee and temperature, as well as discharge of the springs as well. And so we're hoping to do that and ultimately use this kind of information to inform minimum flows and levels regulations to consider thermal refuge habitat for snook, which is something that I think anglers care about. And it's a when you think about significant ecological harm and the way the law reads, this would be one metric you could use in a suite of metrics about minimum flow and level regulations with regard to thermal refuge. And that's some of our FWC colleagues with a bunch of snook in Cedar Key. And I appreciate your time. I'm happy to take any questions. So, yes, sir, Larry.
What's the average life of a snook?
9 years old is an old one, but they can live to 20. But I think if you look at most snook, they're going to be age 10 or less.
Okay, because I was just thinking if you knew about how long they lived, you might schedule your tagging
Yeah.
to where you don't tag too many.
And we are kind of doing that. Of course, our receivers that are out around Cedar Key never have that problem because there's not that many fish and we get them. But around the springs, we are kind of trickling them out so that we're replacing the ones that we lost 7 years ago. So we've gone down that road of thinking, yes. We tagged about 26 fish this summer in Cedar Key to replenish fish that we think are aging out. So,
Question, Chair.
other question?
I noticed by the picture, there's varying sizes of snook.
Mm-hmm.
When y'all tag the fish, do you document the size of the fish?
We do.
Where you can tell maybe the ones that didn't go into, say you had a large number, didn't go into the springs, but some did. Was there any factor that connected that?
That's a good
Bigger
question.
fish or-
Yeah. So we have two. So first of all, our size range of fish we tag is not that great. We're not tagging little bitty ones, but we do have two types of tags. Most of the fish are tagged with a V16, which is fish that are over 20 inches. So, and then we have a V14, I forget the exact number for it, but we'll tag some smaller fish with that. But almost all these fish that I showed today are the V16. So they're over 20 inches. They're basically adults. But it includes some really big ones too. I have not analyzed the data, though. It's a good point for how the size distribution that we do have and whether there was a difference in the behavior. That's a good question. It's not a huge data set with links, but we could look at that and see if there's something changing with small versus large ones.
If it's physiological or just an adventurous
Yeah.
fish.
Yep.
Some were just born to travel, I guess.
Yeah. And well, you see that in these telemetry studies. It's almost like fish have different personalities, and you see homebodies that don't move much and fish that move great distances all the time. So there's some personality parts of that too, I believe. If you think fish can have a personality, I don't know, but
So
Go ahead.
at the spring vent, what are they eating? And I'm just,
they
and what time is the fish fry? Because evidently y'all got a bunch right there. Those are good eat. That's a good eat.
they are delicious, but we're not keeping any of those to eat. That's part of the 600-foot seine they're using in Cedar Key.
Oh,
We'll
okay.
take some of those fish for age and growth sampling, but the snook are a very generalized predator. We have not done diet analysis on these fish in this location, but there's lots of food diet analysis across rivers in Florida, and they eat everything. They'll eat crayfish, they'll eat bluegill, they'll eat mullet, they'll have a lot of diet overlap with largemouth bass. Red drum is a generalized predator, so they're eating everything that's available to them. I don't think that they're in those cold events. I think they're pretty stressed, and so when they're really around the springs in the wintertime, I think that they do eat, but I don't think they're eating like as much as they'll eat in the summer.
So are y'all looking, I know that you're working hard in the Swanee River, but are you looking at the other rivers further around on the estuary west of there, like Steenhatchee and
We have
and
not
Holloway
done.
and some of the and Osceola?
No, we have not, and those would be interesting to look at, mainly because they don't have the springs and the big thermal refuge that the Swanee has. But we know the Swanee itself is a thermal refuge during most winters. It's warmer than the coast, and the fish come in there.
Well, I hooked one out there.
Steenhatchee.
No, further west, almost to Ikefini.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not surprised. We're getting reports as far north as Alabama and Louisiana.
And I was blown away because I said that's not a redfish or a trout.
Yep.
I just said that.
Yeah. We don't have any receivers up there, so I don't know the use of those rivers.
I'd really love to know what they do in the wintertime, if they're going up the Osceola or they're going up these thermal rivers. I mean, because they're staying pretty warm. I mean, you'll see trout and redfish way up in the
yeah.
those rivers and
Yeah.
at that time of the year too.
Yeah.
In the creeks.
Yep, and that's where most of these fish go in the winter because the creeks are generally warmer. But when we get that really bad cold front, then that'll get them, and it'll get snook way before it gets red drum and spotted sea trout.
Are you seeing predator alligators and stuff like that? Are they eating some of your samples? And
We've had tags that end up staying in the same spot. We know it's a dead fish, but we don't know what killed it. So I can't.
we're seeing gators on the coast a lot too in the open water.
It's funny you say that because I just heard from a clammer yesterday that had a giant alligator back in Pelican out on the clam operations that came after him. Like it was a big one.
Yeah.
Just yesterday, it was telling me about it.
A lot of our tagged gator hunters in Dixie, Jefferson, Taylor, they're finding the gators in the open water,
In the open water on the coast.
feeding on mullet and other game fish.
And we've had higher discharge. The water, the coastal is not quite as salty as it was before in the last couple of years. So I'm not surprised to
I
hear.
mean, not just because we're hungry, but there's a lot of stuff we could collaborate on.
Yeah, that's right.
I can learn a lot from you, and you can learn from us. And,
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions?
When you're getting those high counts on the land, I would check and see what the
Yeah.
thresholds are.
Are they at the restaurant?
and they could be. That's on the Dixie side of the river over there.
It is.
I'm just telling you.
Bell Landing's over there.
There's
It might be in
somebody
the-
over there eating.
They got bigger nets than y'all got.
And for some reason, those radio transmitters, they made it across city a couple times. I don't know why. That's
Tim, he knows. He might have.
What time of year do they spawn and where do they do that?
Yeah, so they spawn on the coast. So the eggs have to have brackish water they cannot respawn in the river and have the young survive. So they go out on the coast, and what we're finding, we've actually been trying to look at exactly the spawning aggregations. They spawn in the channels around Cedar Key, so the the channels around North Key and Seahorse Key, they'll get in these big aggregations, and it starts in May, but it's really peak in the full moon in May, and really the peak is June, July, and some in August. So a little bit in May, a little bit in August, but they spawn on those full moon tides, and they group up, and it's interesting. I feel like they're almost using those channels in Cedar Key very similar to how they use the passes on the East Coast, like Jupiter and all that, where there's so much water flushing through there, and they get in these big groups and spawn, and that's what they're doing. I don't think we found all the spawning aggregations, but we found several of them, and we've verified taking eggs out of the females that she is going to imminently spawn, so we know that they're there in numbers and they're spawning. So
And so you have that data where those spawning areas are?
do.
Okay, good. That'd be really helpful. The numbers would be nice. You know, if you got some GPS coordinates. I mean, we got lights on the boats and stuff. I mean, we can.
I thought I might get that. We really appreciate that. I mean, this study I think we learned a lot here. I was expecting both those springs to be big time thermal refuge sites and that we would see fish use them all the time. And this past year was really informative because the river was high and cold, and it turned out Manatee was the only place they could go. So it was, I feel good about what we learned, and I really appreciate y'all's support.
Now, as far as regulation and other things that you guys are recommending and other things, I know that there's certain times further down the coast on the west coast that the season's out, right?
Yeah.
For spawning or other
Yep.
things.
And it's the same for
We
us.
saying the
Yep.
same thing all the way around?
It is. It
Okay.
is. So there's a closed season. It's open 2 times a year, and there's a narrow slot limit. So the snook are well managed. They're not considered overfished. It's not an overfished population. They're healthy in Florida. Really, the biggest threats to snook in Southwest Florida are algae blooms and that habitat problems, loss of seagrass, those kind of things. And up here, I would say the biggest risk is a really cold winter that could set the clock back. But I don't think we will ever lose snook now, because there's going to be some thermal refuge that some portion of the population will be able to survive, even if we get a really disastrous cold kill, which
So they're that strong of a spawner then?
they would come back. Yeah, it would be I think there'll be enough survive a real cold event that they would come back, but it could set the clock back a lot on the numbers. It'd take them years to recover, but they wouldn't. I don't think they're going to get eliminated, is what I'm saying. So.
Mike, I've heard bass fishermen complain that they're competing, the bass are having to compete with them and they're
Yeah.
taking their habitat. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have great bass fishing and snook fishing and spotted sea trout fishing and red drum in the same systems across the whole west coast of Florida from Tampa down south. So I think they do tend to segregate habitat-wise to some degree, but I've heard that concern a lot. And actually, some of the work we're doing in Crystal River right now is actually looking at the diet overlap between bass, snook, and red drum in Crystal River, because anglers there have been complaining. That's funded by FWC, but they're trying to understand what's the potential for competition there. But we know snook eat bass and bass eat snook, and they all eat each other, and they all eat an overlap in prey. So I do expect there to be some impact of snook on these other species with them being very abundant, but I don't think it's going to be a catastrophic thing for any other
Do
species.
you know the cold tolerance of bass versus?
I don't, yeah, I do, but I mean, the Florida bass can live down into the low 30, close to freezing. I mean, they're not thermally constrained by cold like the snook are. And sea trout can live to about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So when it gets in the 30s, it can kill sea trout and red drum. So they can tolerate, 10 degrees colder than snook can. So, all right.
Any other questions? Thank you. That was
Thank y'all.
extremely
Thank you for your
informative.
time.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. All right, our next guest is going to tell us about the dairy best management practices. We'll have a good discussion.
Thank you. Boy, I have to follow that. I might be able to
That's
give you
rough,
some
isn't it?
GPS location, some, Dove Field or something like that, but I can't compete with the fish.
I mean, you wouldn't want us to be, harvesting your animals.
No. So,
Dairy cow probably not that good eating anyways, but that's all.
this is long overdue, and Mr. Keith and board members that have been around more than a couple of years, when we started this effort, your subject title is very generic. I'm going to rifle in sort of how we market the best management practice and what this was all about. But I thank you. I'm going to keep it very informal. Any questions as we go, just let me know. I'll try to hit the high points. I put a lot of data in the presentation just for reading material, so I'll try to move fast. Next slide. Where is it at? Right here. So let's tell a little bit about background. You know, I've been working for dairy in the environmental BMP area for many years. And we just want to thank this water management district in partnership with DEP. A lot of the money flows through DEP out here, but you put your own skin in the game too. We've done a lot of projects over the years, but it's sporadic. We've had experiences where you have great ideas and you get money, but if the farmer isn't bought in, a lot of times you've had some situations staff had to come back, and because the farmer wasn't able to end up doing it, or the farmer went out of business, and because of lack of planning, it really was a challenge to get projects done timely. And also participation was low. A lot of times we'd get a pot of money and the timing wasn't right for every farmer, or they didn't have that buy-in. And so you'll see the standard same dairy farmers, because of their size or their location, if they're in a key area, get a lot of the partnerships. So this was an effort to try to get more dairies in front of you to partner in good projects. So a little bit of background, and I hope Leroy is here because I'm going to have a little fun with Leroy. We started this project in 2022. I went to the legislature working with our friends, and we were trying to look at ways of doing project planning, project development in dairies. And we actually had an appropriation in the budget for $500,000, and also had, I think it was $800,000 to do one similar in Okeechobee area. That was our plan. Well, politics came in play, and the one for Okeechobee got vetoed by the governor, and the Suwannee one survived. Different senator, different area, and different connections and issues there. So we got the funding, and then we're like, well, what's the best way to spend this, for the most bang for the buck? And so we started a discussion with the Water Management District, and early on, Leroy has been with us on this whole role, and the normal practice is for the district to manage the project and do all this. Leroy came to him and says, Ray, why don't United Dairy Farmers do this? I was like, whoa. This is not like, we're a little rinky-dink organization, cash flowing something. And after a long said and done, we agreed that it would be best. We know the farmers the best. We can engage, and we'll work that. And so the agreement between DEP and the Water Management District, myself, is that we, in this first phase and second phase, United Dairy Farmers, which is me, would help coordinate and do the effort. And I will tell you, until you do something, you don't understand the challenges your staff, whether it's ag or any of these contracts and dealing with these things, they are a challenge, timing wise, hurricanes, deaths, laziness, and just timing is not perfect. It has been a challenge, but we moved forward on it, and we started the phase one, which is what we term a pre-design study. And I want to let you know that if you look at your contracts, the actual name of this contract that we have with y'all is called Sustainable Suwannee Nutrient Mitigation Project. We sort of changed the name of it a little bit because it's more than just nutrients. It was, and originally when we started this, we wanted this to not just be about dairy. We were going to have like a non-dairy farmer to be engaged in that initially. We tried to find someone, and the timing wasn't right, and so we had to get an amendment to the contract and just focus on the dairy. Again, those challenges, when you have these great ideas of doing things, that was one of those lessons learned. But I do thank Leroy and everything that Leroy committed to me and his staff in helping us in this has been great, but I'm telling you, it has been a lot of work, and we're still not there, so. Want to tell you a little bit about United Dairy Farmers. We're a little rinky-dink organization based out of my he shed, as I call it, there in my house. I'm the only employee. We have a team of consultants that help me do the job on behalf of our farmers. All the dairies are members of United Dairy Farms, owned by the dairy farmers in Florida, except just for one or two, but majority. Nutrient, which you're going to see, because we subcontracted this first work to Nutrient because I just needed help, and they were just we couldn't have done it without them. They're a leading expert in the field of nutrient management globally for dairy farmers. We started off in phase one, basically doing the sustainability plan, which is sort of a high-level roadmap of what's possible in project development. And we put together a project team. There are some advisors and some other folks, local IFAS individuals or some FDEC staff, but these were our core groups that we met and set a project team together. Then it was our job to go recruit. And at the time, we did have some members that weren't members of UDF that we needed to recruit because that was the job that we had been contracted to do. And we got 17 of the 21 dairies. The dairies that didn't participate, they were either for sale or the timing wasn't right. It just wasn't right for them at the time. And so we moved forward. All the dairies are in BMAPs, which is key. And you'll hear from DEP here in a minute. And a large portion of them are in priority focus areas. This map shows you where those farms are located. Phase one, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we did. We had a kickoff meeting virtually. We had site visits with all the dairy farmers, follow-up meetings. And basically, we came up with a plan that was supported by the farmer and signed off and turned in July of 2023. And so I'm just going to show you, we've got a sample one of the 17. This is what a typical single farm, and then we did a more comprehensive summary of everything as well to benefit the district and have that information. Again, this is an attempt to try to steer the project development in the phase two that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Next slides are going to give you some highlights of what a sustainability plan. This happens to be for White Oak Dairy. I'll tell you about the status on the next phase for this dairy. These are just some key slides, pages from the plan. It basically outlined the different benefits to the environment that they could do, or BMPs, we can call them BMPs, in the feed area, production area, manure management. We did have energy in there because Nutrient has a lot of expertise. We added that in because in some cases like digesters have an environmental benefit, and we wanted to include them. So phase one, I'm just going to give you a highlight of the top 10 suggestions. Some of these are things that we have done before at various stages, some more than others. And so they are listed here in the photos, and I'm going to go through here and highlight a few others. And if you have any questions, you can let me know. Coarse solid separation is a key thing. This is integral to being able to get your organic fertilizer out on the fields. So you've got to get the solids out so that it can work its way in the irrigation systems. This is something we've done a lot. Every dairy, as this says, 14 of the 17 needed more of that to be more efficient and be more effective in their nutrient balance and crop growing. Another area is sand lane and solid storage. Again, some of these work great together. Yeah, Hugh, yeah.
Can you back up one slide?
Yeah. Yeah.
While you're going through this,
Yeah.
Ray, can you explain
Yeah.
briefly
I
what
would-
pieces of equipment are that this board's looking at right now?
Right. The unit that you see there is units that screens. They're manure screens of various things, and they screen manure solids out and the coarse solids, and then the finer solids and the more liquid are able to go out into the system. Sometimes then those solids are removed off site in some cases, or they're utilized in the edges of fields or in different areas for building up. It's very helpful in more sandy soils, for building up sandy soil, for organic matters. There's a lot of partnerships with other farms in the regions. But these screen separators and the cost, we're going to talk about these things crazy. These things in the past, and you all know it if you're involved in any purchasing of anything. out there are just gotten so much more expensive. And again, it's been a challenge in doing this project because we had so much money and we thought, wow, we could do this, but it doesn't take long for the pot to get streamed. So, yeah. So
Does it screen it wet, or does it have to dry in the screen and then screen through?
it comes through wet and then it screens through, and then the more liquid is then put into a holding capacity to be able to be irrigated out. The liquid, it's very moist. I mean, now there are a couple of farms that have taken that to the next. They take that very high quality organic material and put it through a drying drum to dry it out and to get it into a more light, manageable, not so moist component that can be marketed out for people for flower beds and things like that.
Great. Madam Chair, also expound on a little bit. You've heard of the flush barn operation where dairies recycle water through their barns and flush the animal waste out. Well, that animal waste typically comes in at the top of that unit and cascades down over that screen, and that screen vibrates. A lot of them do. They have stationary units. The higher end, more efficient ones vibrate, and that water then passes through that screen, and the solids sheet flow off the bottom there, that pile that you see. And then that water, which nitrogen follows the water itself, being soluble, that water is then put out to a pond to hold it. Right? I'll talk about that a little bit later, I think. And then it can be put out on the field for fertilizer.
But Hugh alluded to, one of the best uses of this water is flushing in the barns. All our barns use recycled flush water. We use fresh water in our actual milk parlors for federal food safety guidelines and things, even though we probably technically could probably push that, but it's just you don't want to take a risk. But the vast majority of our water usage in our barns for flushing to clean our lanes is using the water after it's screened, put back in holding tanks, and then flush down the lanes. This is the sand lane storage process. These are really critical to the overall process. Sand is something that you want to get out of the system, and we recycle it. 90% of the sand is recycled back into the system because they do have to pay for the sand in some capacity. So there's a lot of farms that need to do better because other key BMPs or other components don't operate as effectively if you're missing this piece. That's why it's good to go in and do a whole farm assessment like this so you're not hodgepodging things, no pun intended. This is one of the areas, and y'all have seen some of these a lot over there, and hopefully in the next board meeting, you're going to get a project proposal out of this project but storing this wastewater, reuse water in ponds for large number of days is one of the most effective ways for managing any influence that you're going to have for the environment. Because typically a dairy might have 7 days of storage, whatever your minimum can be. The more days storage means that you can't control the weather, but you have to control the integrity of the system. So if you have rain events and things like that, if you have more water capacity to store up, you can more timely apply. Let's say you have a drought situation. You have more reuse water. Otherwise, you'd have to use groundwater directly, fresh groundwater. You have this very nutrient beneficial water to be able to put on your crops. So we've already built several, and we're going to hear a little bit later. This was one that was done at, I believe, North Florida Dairies, the last go around. But most all of our dairies, really, this is one of the biggest bangs for the bucks for nutrient benefit. A lot of manure handling equipment. A lot of these systems have been done 20, 30 years ago with a federal program. They're just not efficient. There's not a lot of backups and redundancies because, again, we do not want discharge, topping of the lagoons. That gets us in trouble with DEP and the community. It's not want. So there's a lot of improvements to the basic handling equipment. Again, as an integrated, looking at the whole nutrient management process, this has been determined a need that's in a lot of areas. And then freestall barns, a lot of people don't realize, everybody looks at cows and they look at the green field and they think well, it's not always the best for the environment, especially in Florida and the way the dairy operates. You'll have a lot of denuded areas, muddy areas, especially where they congregate with their feed, where you transport them in and out. Down in South Florida, we've been very fortunate to partner with DEP and FDACS on a lot of funding opportunity, especially down there because so wet it is in the tropical area, to get those cows out of those bogs into the barns. That allows us to more effectively capture the nutrients and manage them. You can't control that cow out in the field. It's going to do, no pun intended, do what it's going to do. And so this is an opportunity to do that, and it's really been effective. Up in North Florida, we've sort of moved that way, year decades. So there's not that many of the existing dairies that aren't already freestall, but there are a few. And every dairy probably has some younger stock, heifers or other parts of the operation that would benefit. So the good news is we don't have as many farms, and the need is not as great as maybe South Florida, but it is an area that we really look to, because that allows you to do your recycling better, your nutrient management, nothing against our friends in the fertilizer industry, but less purchases of commercial fertilizer, utilizing your organic fertilizer produced. This is one that was a focus of this effort. And y'all might not remember this. Probably it would take a whole workshop just on this subject matter. But this idea of nitrate interception technology, we got to come up with a better name of it. We've called it every darn thing in the woods. But basically, it's on those spray fields, and this could be applicable to any irrigated crop. You can't control the weather, but once it goes through that root zone, you've lost it. You can't, and there's just no way to do it. This is the only technology that has been demonstrated. Dairy led the way in some demonstrations. We did it on 700 acres over several farms. And there's two pieces of this. There's the reuse, and then there's a treatment. The treatment part just is not really showing that it's effective cost-wise. But the reuse part is basically you through shallow aquifer wells in your thing, you run those, it creates cones of depression, and any potential nitrate leachate that could potentially leave is captured, recycled up for crop growing, or used in the barn, especially for dairies, for recycling. Has a lot of potential. We did it as demonstrations on porcelain fields, but for it to ever go full farm, and it really is not just a dairy technology, it's something that all irrigated acres could do. And it really has a lot of potential for analyzing potentially the nutrient benefits that might be associated with that in your crop growing. But there's a lot of unanswered questions, regulatory, implementation, looking at a whole farm, but it's definitely something that 8 of our farms said that they're interested in maybe looking at or expanding it. Some of them already have it and they want to expand. Convert center pivots to drop. This is something y'all been doing a lot for in the irrigation area for all of agriculture and more efficiencies, but this is once. And again, this ties back to the screen separators and all the systems to be able to effectively. Some dairies have participated in this, but only a portion of their farm. There's a lot more benefit to this, expanding this BMP. So that's a summary of the top 10. That was phase 1. And I appreciate everybody working with us on it. We got through it. It was a lot of challenges, but that led us to move into phase 2. And phase 2 is what we're in right now, and this has been the bane of my existence. I'm telling you, this is where getting things done is a challenge. What this is basically the design phase. I'm going to shorten it up and call it the design phase. We have a fancy name. We have money available. We're paying for the design work for these farms. We've started with a first round of farms, and we got another one just started, and we got 2 more rounds to go, but we're basically getting shovel ready. This is the only time this has been done in the state that I know of where a whole sector in an area works with all the agencies to develop project development in a timely way, an effective way, showing all the benefits and the estimated cost to be able to plan out. It's probably a role model that could be done in other areas as well. So we've started this process. Where we're at is there's a round one of participating farms. The first one has been turned in. That's Alliance Dairy's main farm in Trenton. You can see the map there and the cloaks. These were the ones that, working with the district, we decided were the first ones to go after in this effort. The other three, again, is a challenge. We keep pushing this back because the dairy designer that does the designs for all this is one guy. He's such expert in this area. He does work all over the country. So it's been a challenge getting him, to have time to do his work because Dale Botcher or Stephanie Weeks or Mike Holloway that are ag engineers helping to clean this thing, finish it up, can't do their final work. So we hope to have this round two completed here by the end of this fall, hopefully. There's one of those that I think might go into January, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Then we also have round two participating farms working with the district. We looked at additional dairies that we've got the funding in there available. Full Circle Dairy, Jeffco Dairy, and Shenandoah and Southern Cross. Again, trying to get out there, getting dairies. Some of these dairies you might not ever heard, of doing cost share, trying to get more involved. Those are underway right now. I want to give you a little bit of a sense, since we have one in, and you're going to learn more about this later, hopefully, in contract discussions, is Alliance Dairy Trenton. Again, that's the SIP plan that we have, the design plan. We provide cost, and I'm telling you, the cost of things have just went skyrocketing. I mean, a year ago, this would be $1 million less, year and a half ago. That's how crazy things are out there in the world. And you see that every day in projects you're doing with. So this is a cover letter. This is one of the tables that's in it. The staff have this and they can share with you the details. You'll learn more about it. It has designs. It's ready to go. Like, we try to go in there and get all of the designs done. And this one is building a large waste storage pond. It will be the largest one to record, a 12-acre facility, which expands the holding capacity and just makes things so much easier in nutrient management. It has some sections where it talks about nutrient reductions. Again, that was a snapshot of time on these, but it does provide, for example, in this case, you'll learn more on water savings, cost effectiveness, $1.85 per 1,000 gallons. The nitrogen number is not as good as we'd like it and have to, but a lot of the cost of the projects go up, and that affects your cost efficiency. So all of these plans, there's another section in there that talks about timing. Again, we had some delays in getting the final approvals from the agencies involved. We turned this one in April, but it took a few extra months to get final authority to spend the money. But this farm was ready to go, and we planned on it, so this construction schedule is dated. So the status on phase two is round one. We've turned in the one. We expect the rest of them in here by the end of the fall. Round two is started. Again, the way this works, I think it's important. United Dairy Farmers is just a pass through. We contract with our farmers and they work with their partners. We help coordinate the effort. And when they get done, they give us a amount, how much up to the 50,000, and then we turn it in and get reimbursed by y'all, and we pay them 100%. We don't want things. So the process is ongoing. Round two, we have enough farms to probably do another 3 or 4 as funding is available. Phase three is basically construction phase, implementation. We hope to start that. Your board will hopefully be hearing one of our first ones that comes before you, and hopefully get that started if you approve it to move forward. Funding wise, again, DEP has been great. The district has agreed to seek another wastewater grant. That's how we got the money that we have now. We have $4.8 million available to start funding some of these projects. We hope with DEP's help, maybe get another $5 million awarded to do more in the round two. And we've also requested some additional funding. We're also talking with FDACS. FDACS is updating their cost share programs, hopefully getting more access to funds for these dairy projects. And we'll continue to work with all of them. Summary of sort of the project right now. Again, phase one, is completed. We turned that in about a little over a year ago. Phase 2 is ongoing. It's been a challenge getting these things turned in. We've had to have some contract extensions, but we're working it. And then phase 3 is the construction and implementation. That's it. I know that's a lot. I could have pressed a lot more into this, but we really appreciate everything that you've supported with us over the years. And we look forward to continuing to work this process and hopefully getting you some good projects that you can consider funding in the future. Any questions, Mr. Chair?
Questions from the board? No?
Thank you. It's not as
Tell
sexy
you what,
as
that
fish,
was
but
a lot of information, and I can only imagine the difficulties that you've been able to work through, but good luck with everything.
I will tell you, it's like the first phase, we did get a little bit of a management fee on that first phase. If you calculate the amount of hours and lawyers and extra insurance, God bless it. I mean, it's a lot to do these kind of projects, and I really appreciate everybody's support. Leroy, Jonathan, they all been great. Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Thanks, Rick.
At this time, we're going to take a break, and I'll be back here in 10 minutes. That sound good? 4:25? All right.
Great.
DEP Protection Basin Management Action Plan. Hello.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kim Sugar. I'm the Director of Environmental Assessment and Restoration with the Department of Environmental Protection, and thanks for having me today to talk about some BMAPs. All right, just a quick agenda. I'm going to provide an overview of what BMAPs are and then talk some specifics about the 3 BMAPs within the district, and then talk about our next steps as we're updating our BMAPs. All right. What is a BMAP? It's really our framework for the restoration of water quality. It's a comprehensive set of management strategies to restore water quality. They're developed with stakeholder input. The stakeholders actually provide the projects that they commit to implement. These are adopted by secretarial order, so they are enforceable, and they're implemented in a phased approach. And we do report on them annually through our annual report to the legislature, and we do update them regularly, and recent legislation does require that we update them every 5 years. All right, what's in a BMAP? So a BMAP is developed to address a total maximum daily load. It's where a water body is not achieving its water quality standards, impaired water, and then a TMDL has been set, and that is the restoration target. With the BMAPs, then we develop allocation, meaning the specific responsibilities of the different stakeholders. And then there are milestones. Specifically, we have to do 5-year milestones. They include, as I mentioned, projects and management strategies. They address growth to some level, and we also have monitoring plans. All right. So some governing Florida statutes and legislation. So the main one is Section 403067, the Florida Watershed Protection Act. And we also have the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act for the outstanding Florida Springs. Recently, since 2020, we've had a few different bills the legislature and governor have supported that have added additional really strengthening of our BMAPs to ensure that we improve water quality. And as you see there, Senate Bill 712, the Clean Waterways Act, House Bill 1379, and House Bill 1557 this most recent year. So in Senate Bill 712, they talked about that local governments need to develop wastewater treatment plans and/or on-site sewage treatment and disposal system remediation plans. And OSTDS is also septic tanks for short. The recent legislation prohibits the installation of new conventional OSTDS on lots 1 acre or less within the BMAPs. Also, the recent House Bill 1379 requires that the department work with stakeholders to ensure projects are identified so they each meet their next 5-year milestone. Additionally, it added the Agricultural Cooperative Regional Water Quality Improvement element, and this is where DACs, the water management districts, DEP will work with landowners to identify regional or sub-regional type projects that can also benefit these watersheds. Our recent House Bill 1379, there were several prohibitions that were in the priority focus area of the springs, and those have been expanded to the entire BMAPs. And some of those dealt with hazardous waste sites. It requires that if a new wastewater treatment facility is installed within the area, that it must meet AWT throughout the Springshed BMAP area rather than just the PFA. And then also in 1379, advanced waste treatment is required for wastewater treatment treatment of wastewater effluent and all surface waters. And then most recently in House Bill 1557, this may apply to reclaimed water if the department makes a determination that that needs to be addressed. Okay, I'm going to break down each one of these Santa Fe, Suwannee, and the Wassissa BMAPs for this area. So Santa Fe is over 1 million acres, and then there are 3 subbasins or 3 different spring sheds: Itchintuckney, Devil's Ear, and Hornsby. This area is impaired for nitrate, and the TMDL is 0.35 milligrams per liter. All right, as a status, as of December 2023, the stakeholders have been busy implementing projects that have reduced over 156,000 pounds per year of total nitrogen. And as you can see, there are also several underway, meaning they're designed and under construction. Ongoing are projects such as if there's street sweeping or implementation of different ordinances. So they'll continue on every year. And then there are 25 more that are planned.
I'm sorry, I have a question. Madam Chair, is that okay? Can you back up? How do you measure or quantify the 156,352 pounds per year of nitrate? Are they able to measure that? Are they taking water samples to figure that out? How's that calculated?
So for certain types of projects, it is actual water quality monitoring data that is used to determine that. And then there's others, we have different tools to estimate benefits and loadings and then the benefits from the project. So we'll incorporate that include recharge and attenuation to make sure that we're truly, this estimate is what we actually would see at the spring. So it's not the project. So the project reductions may be higher, but by the time you factor in recharge and attenuation, it would be lower at the spring vent.
So are we seeing in this BMAP, in this basin, the springs getting healthier? Are we able to quantify that? Is the DEP able to see that?
I have water quality graphs for you.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah.
In fact, they're right here. Good segue. All right. So as you can see, the springs are definitely flashy. And, this is the nitrate that's measured at the spring. This isn't necessarily corrected for flow. So obviously flow has an impact on water quality as well. So as you can see, some areas, like for Devil's Ear, not pretty much the same. Then we can see Ishnatucknee is kind of the same. And then Hornsby, it is increasing a little bit. So even in one thing to remember with the implementation of projects is that there is a lag time, especially when they're farther up in the spring shed. So I'm going to talk about some additional monitoring efforts to better capture the benefits of our projects, because I know we've done some different dye tests and different tracing, and when it says it might be 20 years, that's hard to explain benefits of the project. So we've I'll come back to this one. So we've actually added a variety of different groundwater monitoring wells in partnership with the district to capture additional data and be able to monitor within the watershed to hopefully be able to see the benefits of the different projects, so that eventually then over time we would then see it back down at the spring vent. So that's our Devil's Ear. And going back, we also, there were 2 special projects done in this area to try to better capture the benefits of projects, particularly BMPs, agricultural BMPs for the most part. So one's in Santa Fe, one was in the Ishnatucknee. It was a monitoring over time to compare changes once those BMPs were implemented. And it did demonstrate that that with the BMP enrollment, that we did see some benefits to water quality. And so this will definitely help inform future efforts. And then we've also added more monitoring to the Ishnatucknee. Once again, 12 additional groundwater monitoring wells. And then once we have enough data, then we will do some more trend analysis for each one of those locations to help provide us with more information, so we can better understand are we improving or not. Until we be able to look at trends throughout the different spring shed, it's harder to identify that. And then in this one, we were noticing when looking at land use changes and enrollment and implementation of BMP, there is a shift to less intensive agricultural and less intensive land use practices around these different groundwater monitoring wells. All right, for in the Swanee River, this one is also over 1 million acre. We have 3 different spring sheds that we looked at: Madison Blue, Middle Swanee, and Lower Swanee. Once again, the same impairment and the same TMDL of 0.35 milligrams per liter nitrate. In this watershed, there are 79 projects in varying phases, with 21 completed, with over 768,000 pounds per year of total nitrogen reduction. And here you can see the water quality and for the springs that are being monitored. And once again, there's some different trends, some increasing, some staying the same. Some are really flashy and they change quite a bit. And we're also, by doing the groundwater monitoring throughout the spring shed, that's also helping us understand a little bit more what's occurring within the spring shed. Is it different land uses? Is it flow, rain, climate, or are there other things happening? We can monitor a little closer to those groundwater wells to figure out maybe a little more of what's going on. And once again, this is being done in conjunction with your staff here, collecting the samples on our behalf. All right, here are 3 more in Swanee. So we have the Peacock, Banning, and Manatee. All right, we added 18 additional wells to provide additional information in here as well. And we did these in 2022, so we don't have the data yet to help us, but usually we need 5 years of data to really have a true trend to deal with the different changes in climate conditions. But we're hoping they'll help, and it'll help us locally around them as different land uses or BMPs or projects are implemented to capture those benefits. All right. Wassissa has a different TMDL target. It is 0.24 milligrams per liter of nitrate. And then the river actually has a target, a TMDL of 0.2 milligrams per liter of nitrate. So a little lower in this area. In this area, there are 32 projects that are in various stages of implementation with approximately 23,000 pounds per year of total nitrogen reduction. And water quality for Wassissa and Big Blue Spring. Big Blue is meeting its TMDL. Right, and we've added 8 additional groundwater wells in this area. All right, so where are we at now? So we're required by law to update the BMAPs by July 1 of 2025. So what we've done so far, we've developed a nitrogen source inventory loading tool, the INSILT, and we don't have models in this area, so this is kind of a spreadsheet exercise that helps us identify the different loading and attenuations for different sources, and we work with the different agencies and different groups to identify the appropriate loading. As you've seen, we've completed spring vent load analysis where we've developed draft entity allocations, which we are starting this week. Actually, today we had our first public meeting. So we will, over the next couple weeks, be having public meetings. We've already met with the different entities that are required with the required allocation. So it's not a surprise at a public meeting. And so we'll be working with them and to develop the projects to meet the milestones for those allocations. We've recently had our project portal open, so responsible entities could add additional projects if they already had them identified, which helps us identify whether they're close to meeting their next 5-year milestone. And then, of course, we've incorporated all the different law requirements that we've mentioned here, if there are any additional regional projects. And then we're continuing to evaluate if there are needs for any additional OSTDS requirements. While the law has the prohibition on new systems on lots 1 acre or less, some of our BMAPs already had requirements for remediation in the different BMAPs, depending on some of them were if they were only in the PFA or in other areas. Suwannee did not have one. And then we're also continuing to evaluate if there's any additional treatment needed for wastewater. All right, so I just mentioned our InSilt tool. And so this really gets us to what's the loading to groundwater, as I mentioned. Looks at the loading at the land surface, applies different source-specific literature, biochemical attenuations to come up with a surface water loading. And so why that's important, because what we do is once we have those loadings, then how we translate it into what reductions are needed at the spring vent is based on the percent reduction that we mentioned. If we had a TMDL 0.35, whatever the spring's at becomes a percent reductions that needed, and then that is applied to what the InSilt numbers are. That makes sense.
Maybe go through that one more time.
Yes, I know, but you were pointing. So we'll start over on the right. So at the load at the vent, spring vent. So we'll calculate based on, you saw the water quality data we have, and then we'll look at the flow. So we come up with the current load. Then we'll compare to what the reduction is needed based on the TMDL. So that reduction in concentration times that same flow. So say it's 50%. So then we'll go back to the InSilt tool and we'll look at whatever that loading to groundwater we have there. And then we go, okay, that needs to be reduced by 50% to get to that groundwater to ensure that it meets it at the spring vent. Does that help?
Yes. Yeah. I'm gonna have to study it a little bit more.
All right, so for our milestones, so we have 3, particularly for our springs, because these been in place for a little while. So that the goal is to meet 30% reduction in 2028, then 80% in 2033, and to meet the final by 2038. All right, let's see. So I just went through this. So then we'll provide allocations to the responsible entities based on different source reduction strategies, which we'll start here. The first is for OSTDS to meet requirements if they existed in Appendix D of our existing BMAPs, which was where the department for many of the BMAPs had to develop a remediation plan. And then we'll look if there's any additional that is required. Wastewater treatment facilities, as we mentioned, they'll either have to meet AWT or in our BMAPs for different size facilities. There's different concentration for effluent discharges. I'm not sure what's going on in agriculture right there, but what that is implementation of the BMPs. It's estimated that there's a 10% reduction, and for trying to remember if the 10% is for fertilizer based like row crops, and then there's a 15% reduction. I may be flipping the numbers between the 15 and 10 for animal waste, but we've estimated based on literature that if all the landowners implement those BMPs, and those are the ones that are in DAC's BMP manuals, then we would get those reductions. On top of that, if there are cost share BMPs, or if there's regional projects, or the ag cooperative element we discussed, or any other innovative technologies, like some of the stuff that Ray talked about. And then atmospheric deposition is most often allocated to the sources where it was likely to come from, so distributed. And then urban turf fertilizer, we're applying the pro rata share at the spring vent, so whatever its contribution versus the needed reduction. For sports turf fertilizer, for if it's within a jurisdiction, it'll apply to those local governments as well. Additionally, there is a sports turf BMP manual, so we'll be working with entities to implement that. Golf courses, we're going to be requiring that they develop nutrient management plans and to follow any BMPs that golf courses have as well. Okay, so far we've had different individual meetings on allocations and milestones with the stakeholders. Local governments recently submitted their final wastewater and OSTDS plans. And then now we've just completed technical analyses and we're currently having public meetings on allocations and the different milestones. While this is going on, we're still doing technical analyses, project identification, working with those stakeholders and drafting our BMAP documents. Our goal is to have the final BMAP document, final draft that we will then put out for public review. We will have additional meetings for all the BMAPs for stakeholder input. And then eventually we will get it to the secretary for adoption and have that process completed by July 1, 2025. And then we do have a variety of sources for anyone who would like more information. And then we're also, all our notes and posters from our public meetings are also being posted on our BMAP webpage for anybody who would like to follow that. And then on here, you can click this and you can follow and sign up for our different distribution lists if you have interests. And that is all I have today.
I know we've all got questions, but
yeah.
go first.
Some very lofty goals in that.
Mhm.
Has there been any discussion on implementation? Because, I mean, do you really expect to meet those goals?
We're going to work hard until we just opened the portal up so stakeholders can implement projects. Until we start getting a lot of those projects to be able to figure out where we're at in the process. We do know that there are some challenges and a lot of the watersheds will require regional projects. So, yes. And we understand the funding needs as well.
Yes, sir.
Gotcha. Yes, ma'am. So how are you going to keep up with the sports turf and the golf courses?
So for private, we're currently having conversations of how that will be. In some cases, if they have permits, we'll be working through that. Sports turf doesn't have a permit, but some golf courses do. We've been talking with the industry too, how to work. If they're publicly owned, then those local governments, we will work through the local governments to ensure those are in compliance. Then
How do you hold them compliant if there's no bill to hold them compliant?
well, if it's adopted in a BMAP, it's because it's adopted by secretary order, it does have enforcement mechanisms if need be.
Well, I have a solution for you. Senate Bill 712. Change one word in it from producer to consumer, and then everybody has to say how much fertilizer they use, just instead of just the farmers. And that'll get all your information. They have to report it. That's my 2 cents.
I have a question. I'm like Mr. Keith over there. The goals are very lofty in a relatively short period of time. Who established the nitrate levels in those springs to where they're supposed to be? Who came up with the idea that it needed to be at the level that they wanted? I mean, who designed that?
So there was the TMDL process, which is a modeling process. I don't have that information. I'd be happy to get them for you if you have specific ones you would like, but there was a process to establish that amount.
But basically off of modeling and there's really no exact science. So we're really trusting, and we're building we're getting ready to spend millions upon millions of dollars on a goal that we really don't have an ability to really know what that goal really needs to be. Is that what you're saying?
I think there's a little bit more to it than that.
Maybe I'm oversimplifying it. I'm not trying to, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything like that or other. I'm just trying to rationalize things in my mind as a citizen member of a board that is overseeing millions of dollars in projects. That's why I want to know, is it quantifiable to say, yes, we are removing X amount of nitrate? Because then you can start putting a pencil to it and say, okay, what is the overall cost of taking dollars from over here out of the economy or away from taxpayers, right? Whether it's federal money or state money, and taking it out of the economy, and we're going to put it over here, and as a regulatory agency, we're going to decide what's best to do with those dollars, because we're concerned about this or that or this, and it's not quantifiable data. It's not like that we knew exactly what the water quality was 500 years ago, right? Were we able to measure that?
Probably not 500 years ago.
Right. That, and then what kind of natural seepage do we have from natural phosphate deposits and other things that are in the same area of all these wonderful springs that we have? So can you understand where I'm coming from? And I'm just trying to quantify all that right there and figure out, is this really the best direction for the state of Florida to want to go in? And I'm a part of that. I'm a part of the process by sitting on the board at the Water Management District. You understand?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes.
So help me make that rational argument there.
Right. So there definitely is science that went into the team deal. So it wasn't just, hey, here's a goal, let's try to achieve it. I mean, it was based on when we were looking at the biology target and then relating it back to nitrate. There is adaptive management. So we do know as we learn more, we will incorporate that in there. That's part of the reason of adding the additional groundwater monitoring wells, so that we can better understand the system, because we do want to be prudent and responsible with stakeholder dollars. Totally agree with you on that. And so by learning more and we can adaptively manage, we do know that we do have too much nitrate in our springs, and where a lot of the projects are, they're not necessarily near the spring vents, which is why we also added those other groundwater monitoring wells, so that we can show that we, by spending dollars, we're making progress to address what needs to be addressed with the springs.
I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that we're really going in the right direction, or maybe if it's really that important, maybe we need to get a little bit, I'm not saying we're not serious, but maybe we need to put more money in it. Maybe we need to say, hey, we got a real issue here. And as a citizen that's been working in the environment my whole career, that really loves our environment and really cherishes our springs and our way of life in North Florida. I want to do what's right and best for everybody. But then again, I don't want to be frivolous with tax dollars and just say, well, we have the money, so let's just go ahead and spend it. You understand?
Understood.
Because it where we're taking dollars away and allocating it does affect other parts of the economy. I mean, we're making some decisions in the next few months that are going to drastically affect a lot of industry and agriculture in this state, in our region.
Yes.
And I want to make sure that the policy that we put in place, and when we start restricting people from using water or allocating permits or what we're doing, that we're doing it with the best data set that we possibly can. Right?
Yes, understood.
Yeah.
Yes.
We totally appreciate your efforts.
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
You're welcome to help all we can get.
Yes.
But we also know that how much work, best practices to maintain, let alone to see an improvement.
Correct.
With growth in agriculture, with growth in people, with the state's just booming. So to see goals like that, it's like, okay. I'm rooting for you. I'm just curious how you going to do it.
Understood. All the stakeholders help.
Yes.
Agencies too.
It's going to be a challenge to be able to quantify some of the projects, because some of them, as you said, it's going to take years to figure out whether it's really working or not. So a lot of looking.
Were you getting inquiries around the state about some of the new rule changes and stuff, and how they would go about doing projects and partnering and Has there been any
But, I mean,
communications or people just waiting to see what happens?
oh no, with our BMAPs, because we're meeting with the stakeholders, we have lots of conversation and discussions on projects
On
they
what the
can
future
do,
rules are
how
holding?
they can, I'm sorry,
Not what rules are now, what the future rules might hold.
are you talking about for water quantity or?
Well, yes.
Okay, yeah, I haven't been as involved
you
in
don't
that,
get-
but I know the department is addressing a lot of issues with
Just
that.
curious if there's been any,
Yeah, well, and it
conversation with people.
does, water quality and water quantity definitely work together. So I know there are some different things that we're looking at that maybe can help with, through reclaim water, provide additional water for the aquifers, but at the same time would address some of the nutrient issues. So we are engaging at different levels, including with staff here, about what are some different opportunities, because we do want to be cost effective. If we can do one project to address multiple goals and help multiple local governments at the same time, we absolutely would like to do that.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry. So with all the data that y'all collect, do you have a typical amount of nitrates that a regular septic tank puts into the groundwater?
I do not. There may be some folks that do. So I know we actually are embarking on an effort to do some monitoring with that, because we've heard anecdotally and from a little bit of data that's been collected that the actual concentration is increasing based on our diet has changed over the last 20, 30 years. So we are actually engaging in some efforts to collect more data to see how those septic tanks have changed as far as nitrate contributions.
Because my concern is this part of Florida, with all the springs and everything, we're the last frontier, and people are moving up here buying 5-acre lots and putting down septic tanks. And so that's going to increase the amount of nitrates going into the groundwater. And if we knew about how much each tank put into the groundwater, we could quantify the amount of the influx of the population, how it's affecting the nitrates in the springs and the rivers, in other ways than just farmers affecting it.
We do have general estimates of what septic tanks are contributing. So just, we don't have any specific data in our group right now, so that's why I said it that way. But there are universities collecting data and have some studies out. So we do have a general idea. That's why we're able to figure out what the credit is for either converting to enhanced nutrient reducing septic tank or going to wastewater. In addition, we are doing, the agency is engaging in a new study to learn more.
Uh-huh.
Senate Bill 712, that limitations to the septic, traditional septic system we put in, if there were less than 8 acre, it wouldn't be necessary. If it's an acre or less.
Acre or less, it's a certain,
Less than an acre, it has to be
it's a newer.
Enhanced,
an enhanced treatment system.
it has at least 65, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, in 1557, or not 1557, 1379, House Bill 1379 added more to that. So yeah, if it's in a BBAP on 1 acre or less, you can't have a conventional septic tank. It needs to be an enhanced nutrient reducing tank that has at least 65% reduction in nitrogen.
Any other questions or comments? No? Thank you so very much for coming today
Thank
and
you.
helping
Thank
us with
Thank
this.
you.
Ma'am.
All right, any other open discussion from the board or a motion to close our workshops?
I make that motion, Madam Chair.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. And in 5 minutes, we have a time certain for our final hearing for the millage rate. So we'll hang out here for a few minutes and then we'll adjourn or open that meeting.